but it's cool and creative and strategic, which is awesome.
Awesome. Awesome. Anyone else? What do you hope to walk away with today? Do you have something in mind that you hope to, just like at the end of this, I hope to blank?
Yeah, I hope sometimes I have to write UX copywriting and it can just be like, oh, I have to do that. How do I approach it? So just making sure that I can plan a little bit in advance or have a better idea of how to get something out. That sounds great.
Awesome. Fantastic. So we'll definitely circle back around and make sure that at the end of this, you guys walk away with what you hope to get from. And if not, we'll talk. There's plenty of time after this to talk about it. So here's what's on the docket that I've prepared for us tonight. We're going to go over what UX writing is, just to make sure we're aligned, clarify any misconceptions or ambiguities. We're going to talk about why good UX writing is important. Go over some simple, hopefully easy to remember do's and don'ts, and then do some quick, fun practice together. Okay, so about me, what makes me qualified to give a presentation about UX writing? Well, I do have a formal education in technical writing and communication, including a bachelor's and master's degree. I've held positions in book publishing as an editorial assistant and editing manuscripts. I also started at HCSS as a technical writer almost 15 years ago. After helping to introduce a design process, I was doing both technical communication and design for about over 7 years before I focused on just the UX of things, including UX design and writing. I'm a proud grammarian. Fun facts: I can recite helping verbs by memory, and I often try to beat Grammarly for fun. I'm very proud of my scores. Grammarly, thank you. If you don't use Grammarly already, I do highly recommend it. I've been pretty impressed by it. I don't plan to bore you with the rules of prescriptive grammar tonight, though I do personally find grammar fascinating. At the end of the session, though, I hope you walk away with some useful tips in writing effective microcopy that will elevate your UX designs. So let's go over together what is UX writing. As I mentioned earlier, I just want to make sure we're on the same page and clarify any misconceptions about it. So UX writing, by definition, is the practice of crafting the customer-facing text or copy that appears within the design of digital products. The primary goal is to guide users to complete tasks in the digital product. UX writers are interaction designers for product content. The product of your UX writing is the microcopy, and the microcopy provides hints for the user. So you can think of it as the microcopy to UX writing is UI design to UX design. And like UX design, there's a whole process behind UX writing. Normally, if you have a UX writer, you're working with them throughout the design process. And if you don't have one, then you will need to ensure that you are incorporating the UX writing part thoughtfully as part of your design process. And like the UI, the microcopy is just the outcome of the process. And it includes, but is not limited to, call to action buttons, instructions to explain to the user how to get familiar with something, navigation buttons that you'd find on navigation menus, hamburger menus, tab bars, mobile apps, confirmation messages to ensure that the action you're about to do is definitely the action you want to do, especially a destructive one. Privacy stuff, of course, you'd probably skip over or gloss over those a lot. Loading screens, when you impatiently wait for that screen to load. And of course, error pages to give you some idea that something went wrong. So why is good UX writing important? So before we talk about that, let's think in reverse. Can anyone tell me what would be considered bad UX writing? Anyone kind of take a guess? I'm sure you've seen
Something that's unclear or just really confusing.
Confusing, unclear, very good.
Long.
Long.
Or excessively long.
Excessively long, yes.
Too many adjectives.
Too many adjectives, okay. So,
or a user falls off, sorry.
What is it?
A user falls off the website.
Yeah, there you go. You lose engagement, make you stare at a screen too long even, or longer than you should anyway. So yes,
Sarah K in the chat says incorrect tone for the audience.
Incorrect tone for the audience, definitely. I'm sure we've seen that and scratched our head at some. So great example. So if you think about it, as you've already kind of illustrated, whoops, right backwards. Bad writing slows things down. Good writing speeds things up. And so to give you one example of a business value of good UX writing from Maggie Stanfill, the senior UX writer at Google, they made a simple change where she changed book a room to check availability, and the engagement rate increased by 17%. And this is a great example of ROI on good UX writing. If you start on your text early in your design process, it could help you actually reveal a design problem. If you have to explain the design so much in the text, it's not the text that needs improvement. So that's kind of your hint there. And like with any type of good UX, it's always about the users first. So you want to think about what is your user's goal? And of course, the tone, what are your users feeling at that moment? And what do you want them to feel? And most importantly, the language you use should be human-oriented and encouraging. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and tell us how this example makes you feel?
Tense.
Dated.
I'm sorry?
Dated. It looks really old.
It does
Old
look
kind of
really
one.
cool. How does the text on here make you feel? Like
I don't know what proceed does.
I'm
The
sorry?
proceeding, yeah. Verbose.
Verbose, okay.
It feels very technical.
It is technical. So if it were me, I don't know which option I would choose because both seem to be pretty destructive. And usually in a situation where I don't know which options to choose, I'm going to probably try to X out of it. But as you see in this example, that X is disabled. So now I'm probably anxiety induced and probably just going to shut down my computer just to avoid any deletion or destructive action here. But this is a very extreme example, obviously, but a real one. And that's something we definitely want to avoid our users feeling. So now let's go into the do's and don'ts. And a lot goes into UX writing, and I can leave you with an easy checklist that will get you started on the right path to good microcopy. By no means is this a comprehensive list, but this is highlighting what I feel may be important and easy for you to just get started. Editing is never really done. So let's start with the do's. Number one is to always be clear. If you have to think about the meaning, then it's not written clearly. You want to always ask yourself, could it be clearer? The key word is edit. You want to keep it free of any technical jargon. Make sure you give enough context. And let's look at an example. So this one, failure, an authentication error has occurred. Well, that's not super clear. I'm sure there's simpler language, such as login failed, wrong password. And that's way more clear than the original. The next do is to be concise. When it comes to reading text in digital products, most of us are skimmers. The more concise your writing is, the more digestible and better it is. When writing a draft, you will almost always have extra fluffy words. Whether you're word vomiting or writing how you speak, you probably have unnecessary words in there. And as Mark Twain said, writing is easy. All you have to do is just cross out the wrong words. But it's not just about being short, it needs to be efficient. Is it still clear? Did you remove any of the meaning? So if you look at this example, you must log in before you can provide a comment. It's clear. Could it be more concise? Sure. So if you omit a lot of these fluffy words, you can just simply say log in to comment. And it's still clear, more concise, and therefore it's more digestible. Another tip is to just front load. If you have an objective, start with it, front load with important concepts first. For example, tap on the item to see its properties. It's not bad, but the more important information is at the end here. And if you're skimming the beginning, you might have glossed over or skipped the end. So if you reverse the order to see the item's properties, tap on it. Next is to be useful, especially with call to actions. Using specific verbs when possible. Give clear specificity. It makes all the difference. For example, yeah, you have a wrong password. Okay, your option is okay. It's clear and concise, all right, but that call to action is not very helpful. I mean, what can we do to make the call to action better? Add specificity. So you can try again or try to recover your password. And of course, be consistent. Use the same terminologies to connect. It sets a pattern. Sometimes I hear from others that they use synonyms to avoid being repetitive. And it's okay if it's slightly repetitive because this isn't creative writing. Instead, you're creating parallelism. So these are a few common words frequently used in digital products. They're synonymous with some slight nuances. The point is to just pick the one that's most fitting and just stick with it throughout your product. Next is to be present. Write in present tense. In most cases, your user is reading that information for something that's happening in that moment, and you want to be in that moment. It creates a sense of immediacy and action. It often makes the microcopy more concise. Exceptions do happen, of course, for past tense, but that's when you'd have to evaluate what makes most sense to your user. So for example, you just ordered your ride, and that's clear, digestible information and informative, but your ride is on the way. This feels better because it's more immediate and it has better action with it. And be active. You want to use active voice instead of passive voice for most cases. It's more attention getting. It speaks more directly to the end user, and it also helps you keep your message more concise. So if you take this example, the search button should be clicked when you are ready to search for an article. It's kind of a mouthful. It feels very disconnected from the user as well, robotic and of course passive. So if you switch it to active voice, click the search button to search for an article. It's more direct to the user, it's clear, it's useful, and it's concise. So let's talk about some don'ts. And we did mention this earlier. You want to avoid long blocks of text because ain't nobody want to read that. Remember that we all scan content. The users are most likely skimmers, so you don't want to show so much detail up front. So if you look at this example, which one are you going to likely read? You're going to read this, or you're going to read that. And especially if it's a destructive action, you want to make sure that they understand that information. And with the first one, it feels pretty scary. You might have to reread it a few times to really trudge through it. And with the second one, it front loads the information more concisely and clearly. The call to action is correlated directly with the front loaded information. So definitely avoid any types of long blocks. If you see long blocks, see how you can edit that even further. Also avoid double negatives. It's best to try to keep your content on the positive side. If you use double negatives, it can get confusing. For example, cancel your workout. Okay, or cancel. It's like, what exactly are you doing? Are you going to cancel me canceling the workout? You could just simply say cancel workout, yes or no. And that removes that double negative and that ambiguity. And we also talked about earlier, someone mentioned technical jargon. Definitely want to avoid that. I feel like this is something you might run into the most. And the user is a person. You definitely want to talk to them like one. However, even being around developers and tech speak for a while, sometimes you may lose yourself in the jargon. So you always want to check yourself. And this is an example that you might see in a lot. You know, it's very techy. It's got the extra error message in there. If you speak in a more human-oriented language, it feels like you're now talking more to a person. So sorry, you're not authorized to view this page versus the unexpected error. What error? And it's just jargon. Okay, and so my last don't is to avoid needless politeness. And rest assured, you're not being rude. Instructions are imperative. We're all raised to be polite, but sometimes it's best to just get straight to the point. Introductory phrases can waste precious space and they dilute the message. You want to use your own judgment and see which is clear. For example, would you like to save or delete or save? Or just save changes? Yes or no? And it's already more concise, but it hasn't lost any meaning to this. Another example of needless politeness is using the word please. Like, for example, please enter your password, when you could make that more concise with just enter your password. Remember that good microcopy is clear and concise, simple enough to guide the user. Adding please takes away conciseness and it doesn't really add clarity. On top of that, if you use please for every user action, the effect flattens and you don't have its full strength when you need it to sound meaningful, such as tone for inconveniences. Of course, you still want to empathize with the user in difficult situations. So let's look at this example for a loading screen. Please wait versus wait. Okay, the one on the right seems a little harsh versus being more polite, saying, please wait. We know this is an inconvenience, but consider this. Instead of using the needless politeness, wouldn't it be more effective to make it more concise while maintaining clarity by rewording? So perhaps it's loading instead. And it already implies that the user needs to wait because the loaders, and if you want to make it even more useful, you can place it strategically where the content is loading, or even add specificity that you're loading your messages. And so now needless politeness is not needed. So I compiled your checklists at the end here, and my dogs just ran in here. So I have your checklist here at the end. I will be sharing a PDF of this presentation afterwards, so you can just use it for future reference. And with that, we're going to move on to a quick practice together, and then we'll open up to Q&A after this. So here's your first puzzle. Let's play a game. I don't want to unsubscribe. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and tell me what the issue is here?
It's a double negatives and it's trying to trick someone into unsubscribing or into staying subscribed.
That's right. Yes, it's a double negative, and it's a little bit of a gray pattern there in design and trickery. It's like, nice try. So how would you change it? How would you fix this?
I would change it to either just say subscribe or unsubscribe.
Excellent. Yes. So just choose one, unsubscribe or subscribe, depending on what you are trying to do with the rest of your design and gear the user to guide them in one direction or the other. Very good. Awesome. What about this prompt? You entered an incorrect password. Okay. Anyone see an issue with it?
It's too wordy.
It's wordy. Okay. How would you fix it?
Incorrect password.
Incorrect password. Yes.
And
I think we can also make it more useful.
And you
Yeah,
can
this
make it more
is the-
useful. Very good. Such as this. Give me more options. Tell me what specifically I need to do. Excellent. All right. So now we got this error message. Can anyone point out the issue?
It would be helpful if you modeled what a correct password would be, or say exactly what's wrong, missing an @ symbol or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Like what is
Jargon.
a properly formatted one?
Jargon.
Jargon. Good.
So, okay, never mind.
Oh, go ahead.
No, because I like an icon to show that there's an error, because the red, might like just using the red to say it was wrong.
Yeah,
I'm getting ahead of myself.
inaccessible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself with the accessibility. That's
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's
Come
good.
back next month to hear Nydia tell us about accessibility.
Yeah, that is good UI though, because you're adding that visual that, hey, there's something wrong here. But yes, so in terms of the text itself, it's a little techy. You could use a better example, point out and make it more useful, right? And there's also needless politeness there. So now we edit it. You could just say use a, and then you're properly formatted address. If you want to go even further, maybe you can prevent user error with a more descriptive placeholder. And if they skipped over, then then the error message is now just like, okay, enter a valid one. Here's your format. Okay, what about this error message? What's the issue here?
Technical jargon.
Technical jargon, very good. And how would you fix it?
Well, I would write in human terms what the issue is and how to fix it.
Yep, we could definitely remove that, make it more user-friendly language. Take it even further by making the call to action stand out more, the primary versus the secondary. In some cases, like the developers I work with, they really like to include the error jargon, so they have a reference on how to fix it. So the compromise would be maybe hiding it in another link to view that detail, so the user doesn't have to be exposed to it. And of course, if it's absolutely unnecessary, then we can always just leave it out and it makes it more concise. So now here's a confirmation message. Can anyone find an issue here?
Sure about what?
Yeah,
repetitive.
it is repetitive.
Be more specific in your calls to action.
Yes, it's not very specific in that. You're right. So it is unclear. And how would you fix it? Like off the bat, how would you rewrite this?
Like for the CTAs, yes, delete location, no, cancel.
Okay, very good, very good. And the important information is also kind of buried in that description text. If you're skimming, you're basically skimming usually the header and the options. So it's like, are you sure? Yes or no? So the important information, if you move that and front load it, you can actually just say delete information. This will permanently remove it from your network. And you can take it even further by highlighting that destructive action. But if you really want to front load the information further by highlighting the permanence of this action, you can front load that as well. And last one, I have another error message here. What's the issue here?
It's not specific to, it's not telling me exactly what I did wrong.
Right, it's not being very useful. It produces a lot of cognitive load to figure out a corrective action here. So if you want to provide specificity here, just be, this occurred in the past as an example. So awesome job, everyone did great. So that is the end of this SkillFlex portion. I've included my contact information in case you'd like to keep in touch. The Instagram information is my department's, and I occasionally post interesting things there. Though it's been a while since everyone's worked from home, so not a whole lot of interesting things that's gone on there. But we also added a Slack channel for UX writing. If you have more questions about UX writing or would like to support with your own practice. So if you ever have a question, and you can just kind of ask the community and anyone else who is a UX writer or can kind of help practice and hone their skills, we can all collaborate there together. Remember that there's many ways to skin a cat. The main question is if it's meeting your users' needs and questions with your own practice. Remember that the tips that I provided are just the tip of the iceberg. The more you practice, the more you understand the reasoning behind your word choices and structure, the more you'll notice the impactful, minute details. So I'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A. Or discussion, we can just talk about cats.
There was a question in the chat about the Slack group or the Slack channel. If you join Hexagon Houston Lee and search writing in the channel, it will pop up. It's a brand new channel that was created today. I'm sorry, that wasn't a question for you.
Oh, no, that's fine. I actually don't see the chat, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Could you, how can you evaluate or audit some of the UX writing you might have in an application? Do you have any tips maybe for evaluating what might exist already in an app?
Definitely use the checklist that I provided here. If you are questioning why something needs, well, first of all, if you're evaluating your own software, you want to make sure that any text on that screen is actually going to be useful. If it catches your eye for any reason, like I hear a lot that users don't like to read. You know, you want to be able to guide them and help them without them knowing that they're being guided. So there are these subtle hints throughout the screen, and any lines of text on there, you want to make sure that it's not fluff. That's just not decoration. It's just not going to sit there. It needs to have a purpose. It needs to be incorporated in your design and UX in some forwarding way. Otherwise, the big question you'd have to ask yourself is, do we need this? And if the answer is yes, how can we improve it and make sure that if the user sees it, it's actually going to guide them in any way. So that's the first approach, is just, do I need this?
Right. Perfect. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation. So I have a question on the jargons. Like how do you what is the process of like brainstorming new words, or like resolving like jargon definitions? And do you have any tips, or is there like any process that you guys follow for UX writing?
So process wise, so I'm at a relatively small company. We're growing now, but we don't have technical writers or anything anymore, because that was me. And so my reputation precedes me. And a lot of people know that I still have that writing background. So anytime a developer or QA has questions on wording, that process is just basically tagging me in a card or email or whatever and asking me, you know, help with the message. There's usually a task for it, to like get with Jamie to get this message. So that's our very, very informal process. And a lot of my writing is incorporated into my design process. And anytime I go through a design review after the completion of a developer or development process, I'm always reviewing that text as well, and the process of having to go through QA to ensure that the text is edited in a clear fashion. So that's our process. But in terms of your question about addressing technical jargon, is that usually coming down from developers and you're translating it? Are you producing?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, if there's any like really complex features and functionalities, and it's really hard to explain to users what this functionality is, and it's just yeah, the description can get really long, and it's just like sometimes just sitting there and like, you know, trying to change it but couldn't think of something better. And it just, is there any tips on looking up, you know, wording choices, or like and are there any testing methods that you guys use to see which options are better? How do you guys determine like if a term is successful or not?
Okay, very good question. So in terms of, if you are receiving microcopy that is filled with technical jargon,
Right.
One of the best things is to understand it. And if that means meeting with the developer or whoever the subject matter expert is in that area, is fully understanding why this message is necessary, who is benefiting from the technical jargon part. If there's specific code in there that they have to see for some reason, really highlight what part is questionable. If you don't understand it, then most likely your users are going to have trouble, because you're the user advocate. So if you're highlighting that technical jargon, you'd really have to raise the question of, why is each of this piece of information important, and can the user go without it? Because if it's all technical jargon that the developer needs for them to troubleshoot, then in the previous example, we can just hide that under a details link and they can collapse that, or they can expand that for their own reference later without providing cognitive load for the user. And then the next thing is wording everything else in such a way that conveys what you learned about that technical jargon, like the importance of it, and conveying that in human language in a way that, you know, if you had to explain it to the least tech savvy person in your life, so
Right.
that would be my mother, you know, if I had to explain this to her on how to do something, how would I explain that to her in the clearest sense? And then keep editing that. Did I remove meaning? Is it concise? Is it helpful? Just down that checklist to make sure that it's checking all those points, that it's going to guide them to the right path, to the action that they need to take. And revisiting that technical jargon to make sure that if there is something useful there, that it's translated to get them to point A to point B. In terms of testing it, it's usually ran through, for example, on my team, I would run this through QA and QC because they also are user advocates in a different way to ensure that it's not losing its meaning, it's conveying the right information, and it's going to be able to help the user ensure for point A to point B, but at the same time bridge that gap with the developers that they can troubleshoot when needed when they revisit this issue. Because sometimes I find that developers put way too much information in there than they need because
Right.
they're being very technical about it. They're like, well, technically it's not deleting, it's actually removing it from the database and blah, blah, blah. It's like, the user doesn't really need to know all that.
Right.
I'm like, you're just deleting it. That's all it really means. So it just goes back to that question. It's like, what are they trying to convey? What are you trying to get the user to use or to do? And what can you omit from that? Did that help at all, or did that? I just
Yeah,
make it more
yes, that's
convoluted?
super helpful. And yeah, and if some people are pushing back and be like, hey, like people are used to this tool, used to the jargons, like are there particular, have you encountered this before?
Not as much now. I can understand that from in the beginning, because at this point I've been at the company for 15 years now, so they kind of respect my word over it because I understand the users. I've been there longer than most of the developers actually, so but I will occasionally run into that issue where there's pushback on it,
Right.
but I always come with a rationale. I'm like, this is my concern with it. It is creating ambiguity. It is, if we want to convey that, I would like to convey it this way in a more humanized language, but still, you know, convey their message, but in a different way. And if there's ever still pushback on it, I get a product manager involved, or at least a product owner involved to say, and to kind of like, you know, be the tiebreaker. And then have their insight on it. I'm like, if it's that important that you have to have this technical jargon, I would like just to have another voice on that as a product owner to ensure that that is accurate. Because if there's doubt and they're not going to understand that, then we need to have someone who's closer to the users to validate it.
Right. Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So there is some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So from Justice, she asks, how do you make instructions that usually has to be technical engaging?
Ooh. So thinking back to my technical documentation days, to make instructions more engaging, of course, is back to conciseness, scannability, and that's going to formatting. Formatting is huge. You definitely don't want the huge blocks of text. You want to break it up in some way. Hierarchy, information hierarchy, using a lot of headers, bullet points, padding between your bullet points or between paragraphs. Keep your paragraphs really short and simple. And if you're able to use some extra UI formatting in there, like with icons that are not just for decoration, but actually relevant to draw your attention to the right things. If you have specific notes, call outs and highlights, those type of shadings help break up the information. In the whole document itself, the document design itself, it's more visually appealing to where it doesn't feel like you're looking at technical documentation. Did that help? I could elaborate.
Okay, we hope that helped, Justice. Jane asked, in your experience, have you tried teaching this to the developers and have them practice this and using you as a check or use internal demo to check?
I have taught this class-ish, if you want to call it a class. I've taught a session like this before for anyone who was interested. And I don't hear from them as much, those who have attended it, but then the others, they will still have questions. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question, Jane?
Internal demos. Sometimes these questions come up because we're reviewing their build and then we are realizing the copy isn't clear, it's lacking context, and that's when we usually fix things. So I wonder if that's like both opportunities to cross-share and cross-learn between team members about UX copy.
Okay. Yeah, that actually happens to me quite a bit too. That's when I catch a lot of the microcopy that the developers develop themselves.
Yeah.
And I always found it to be more effective to address it directly with the developer after that session, rather than calling them out in that meeting. It actually is more harmful, I felt, when I do it in a meeting, because then it detracts from everything else, because the whole purpose is for a demo or just to review things with stakeholders, etc. It's not really about microcopy, right? It's just to get the gist out. So I always meet up with the developer, either with the chat, an email, or, I used, if we were in the office, then it would be, I'll just stop by their desk and just go over it. But I always make a note about it. And then I revisit it with them and I just go over the microcopy, and I'll review it with them. And I always explain the rationale behind it, and most of the time they just don't like to write. They're not writers. They prefer to just deal with the code and make it work. And they just put placeholders in there. And usually there's a to-dos like, just cross-check this with Jamie later, or unless they wait for me to catch it. And they're usually very receptive to that. And even if I give the rationale and stuff, so they know that in the future, then sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. I think one of my team members told me recently, he's like, oh, I don't use please, right? I remember that. So little things like that will stick, but other things like front loading, they just put the information in and they don't really think about the front loading. But then when I reverse it and explain it, they're like, oh yeah, I remember you mentioned that before. So it's just a continual process, and it's good collaboration too. And I feel like you actually build a better relationship one-on-one when you don't call them out in a large group like a demo, and just work with them, and it helps all around.
Cool.
There's another question. I just wanted to say that Justice said thank you. It was very helpful.
Yay!
And then Catherine's asking, are there any books or tools that can help with this? I'm assuming just UX writing in general. Fortune did share some resources, some books in the chat, but do you have any that you would like to share?
Oh God, that whole shelf right there is full of them. Well, a lot of it stems from my technical writing background. So what I can do is I'll post them in the Slack channel, in the UX writing channel, and I'll just kind of list my resources there. And I feel like after this, I'm just gonna peruse my bookshelf and just pull out my favorite ones. Granted, they're probably not as cool as a lot of the ones that are out in the market now, but English hasn't really changed much. So I feel like these are still nice references that I like to keep.
Awesome.
Yeah, and also, how long does it take for you to come up with a microcopy? Wondering.
Honestly, not very long. Perhaps this is my superpower. I can probably come up with microcopy depending on its complexity. If it's a really, I just had one today as an example. Someone messaged me and said, okay, we have this button. When you click, it's copy, and you click on copy, and it opens a drop down that says copy to other business units, and they wanted to make it one button, but that was a really long button, and it's like, well, how could you change this? And so rather than coming up with new wording on that, and this is where the UX process comes in, it's like, do they need to know that they have to that they're going to be, it's going to be towards other business units if this is the only option? And if they click copy and it opens a panel that says that's going to copy it to other business units, is that enough? So then that becomes a workflow question.
Right.
And then, so there's that. And then there's others that are just like the error messages that we were looking at earlier. I could probably edit those in under 5 minutes. But if it's technical jargon and then there's more conversations to be had about, okay, what exactly is necessary, and it involves more people, then that could take 20 minutes or so, if I were to give a rough estimate.
I see. And I'm just wondering, for testing the copy, I saw online there's something like a clause, like CLOZE test, where it's asking users to fill in the blank and see if they still understand what it means, or are there any like testing methods that you recommend for different wordings?
So I feel like maybe I'm old school because I don't use an online tool or anything to check the verbiage. So testing is really just done as not just a microcopy itself, but usually as a whole, with the design to kind of tell the whole story as a guide. And like I said, usually the testing I would do it within QA, as well as the product owners, to ensure that the correct message is coming across and that the full story is there, if that makes sense.
Right. And do you just do it inside the usability testing and then see if they have issues with understanding the flow, or how do you particularly pull out for like wordings to test, or is it mainly just seeing how users complete the flow?
It's usually how, yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, usually if it were going to be involved in a usability test, it would just be how the user completes it from A to Z. If there's verbiage that I have any concern about, then I will see if they even use it or see it. But if I have any concern with the verbiage, then I'm focusing a lot on editing it and determining how to make that not an issue or the focus of a usability test. But a majority of the time, it's just if they can get to point A to point B and use the microcopy as a guide, then we'll identify it there. And and a lot of times the microcopy being an issue will be identified in the usability test. Like if they were looking for the word done instead of back or something like that, then that's something that will come up. They'll be like, oh, I was looking for an explicit button that said X. Then that would be kind of our answer there. And that would be something that you don't necessarily write up. It's just like part of that process.
Right. And does any product managers or business people ask, about the like business value of copywriter, if there is a particular role for it in the company, like how do we turn it into like a business value added?
If you were to bring it to management,
like how do you turn it into, like, for example, at the beginning you mentioned like the Google person actually increased like 17% engagement, like how, like explicitly for the copy, like how would you recommend to like test it in order to get that just for the wording wise?
Usually the most effective way to do that is if you're going to bring quantitative or qualitative data like that, then you would do some kind of A/B testing, which is pretty much what Google did. And, you know, you had
Right.
group A looking at the microcopy this way, and you had group B looking at it this way, and that's how you can determine the effect of it. And it's a tough sell, but if you were to put in the work, if you were to provide a UX design or some kind of user workflow with bad microcopy or no microcopy and compared it with good microcopy, and to just demonstrate the difference, because as we said earlier, good writing speeds things up and bad writing slows things down, especially if it's going to cause cognitive load. If you have bad examples in your product, and you were to take that technical jargon, for example, or something that the developer had written and then compared it to something that you cleaned up and show that as a presentation with the stakeholders to show the difference and how much more user friendly it would be. It's best to do it visually. So whether you have the quantitative or qualitative data to back it up, or just to present it in a visual way, like I kind of did here, where I just gave you like A, B, which one would you rather want? Which one would you rather present and want your customers to see? Because it sets this tone, it sets your credibility, your product's credibility, and image is a big thing for any company. You want to present your best foot forward, not just make it work. You want to make it marketable, and that's the big selling point.
Right, definitely. And do you have do you put the terms inside like a design system, or is it one-off?
There are certain terms that we'll include in the design system, like the most common term, like I mentioned earlier, select instead of choose. And if we were to see any choose anywhere, then we were like, okay, it needs to be select. Done, the connotation of done versus close. Okay, cancel, yes, no. Those, they all have places. Like there's reasons to use done. There's reasons to use close. Those very common languages. And then error pages, like very common error pages, will have those more common reusable components. But of course, you're always going to have a one-off because every product has a different use case.
I see. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if I miss anything or you have more questions, feel free to contact me or use the Slack channel. And I'm happy to answer more questions if I didn't answer it directly.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry, I think I missed the part where you mentioned like how to, any classes to take in order to improve the UX copywriting.
I didn't recommend any classes because I don't know of any current classes that I could recommend right now. But I did say that I was going to go through my library back here and put it in the Slack channel to share that there on what's on my bookshelf. That has always been a nice reference and guide for me.
Right. And how do you build that skill?
Practice. Yeah, just keep practicing. And it's your level of attention to detail. Like when you read something, like go and do that right now when you look at your websites, when you're browsing for things in your cart or looking at your phone, and just edit in your mind, like, could this have been written better? If you were looking at your own microcopy in, like, I don't know, Instagram or LinkedIn or something, and you read a posting, just think about its call to action, whether just go through the checklists and see if it meets any of those and how you would change it. So the more you get your mind in that mindset, the more you'll notice those small details. And because that's I'm a walking grammarian, and so anytime I see glaring issues, it always sticks in my mind. I'm silently correcting it in my mind, but that's just how my mind works.
Nice.
Well, we will definitely get all the resources posted on the Slack channel. We also have a Notion page that Janelle has created for us. So that's where we'll be putting the event recording, and Jamie is graciously providing her slide deck as well. So you'll have that for reference. So we'll be posting those links in a couple of days. So be on the lookout for those. And we're trying to get better at documenting our events. If we were in person, we would take a group photo, and it's a little bit harder to do so in a virtual environment, but we would love to just capture everybody who's here. So if you feel comfortable, please turn your camera on, and Jasmine is going to take a screenshot for us just to document the evening. So before everybody hops off, we'll do that, and then we'll let Jamie get back to her kiddos and her puppy dog.
Oh, they're asleep by now.
Okay.
At least my kids are, my dogs are not.
All right.
Okay, I'm assuming if you have your camera on, you're okay with this. So I'm gonna take it. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Yay! We need to say UX writing as our cheese. All right, well, thank you all ladies for joining us, and hopefully you can make it next Thursday evening for our game night. And just huge thanks to Jamie for all of your work putting together this presentation and suggesting the Slack channel as well. We're super grateful to get to continue discussing resources. So
Awesome.
Y'all have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.